Okay, welcome everyone to week 2 of the Leadership Alliance Professional Development Workshop Series. My name is Dr. Taiese Bingham-Hickman, and I am the Executive Director of the Leadership Alliance. I will be moderating today's event. This event is a component of the Leadership Alliance Virtual Professional Development Series. The Leadership Alliance Executive Office and its partners created this initiative to ensure continuity of skill building, networking, and exposure to graduate programs for undergraduate and graduate students from across the country. Paired with our Wednesday evening workshop series, we hope to expose you to a discussion of critical issues, allow you to network with each other and with our wonderful doctoral scholars, as well as develop a learning approach and skill for navigating your research careers. This evening, I'm pleased to introduce doctoral scholar, Dr. Brandon Crosby. Dr. Brandon Crosby is a user experience researcher who most recently worked at Meta. An organizational psychologist by training, Dr. Crosby decided to pursue his PhD while attending the Leadership Alliance summer program at Stanford in 2010. After receiving his bachelor's at Morehouse College, Dr. Crosby successfully earned a doctorate in organizational psychology at the University of Maryland. After leaving the University of Maryland, Dr. Crosby went on to become a behavioral scientist at the Rand Corporation, where he studied diversity in the military. Dr. Crosby transitioned to the tech field in 2020, joining Meta, previously known as Facebook, as a user experience researcher. There, he worked on understanding how content creators could best use social media platforms. Dr. Crosby is originally from Baltimore, Maryland, though he currently resides in Los Angeles with his lovely wife and adorable dog. He credits much of his success to the Leadership Alliance and fondly remembers how the program helped him learn about the world of research. So thank you, Dr. Crosby, for joining us. We're so happy to have you with us this evening. Before we dive into student questions, I'd like to ask if you can just give a little bit of background about your time and experience with the Leadership Alliance and how that has kind of impacted or influenced your career trajectory.
Sure. So as you mentioned in my biography, I was attending Morehouse College when I learned that research and getting my PhD was something that I wanted to do. I was in a program that existed at the time at Morehouse called the HOPS program that was all about getting students into PhD programs. And through that, they had many different connections to different research programs and opportunities. And that is when I first learned about the Leadership Alliance. And I was immediately impressed. The year before I participated in the Leadership Alliance, I did another summer program at The Ohio State University. And so I knew the value in this, and I knew that I wanted to do a similar program. And the Leadership Alliance was just too interesting and too tempting. And I really enjoyed the schools that they worked with. And in particular, there was a professor at Stanford that I wanted to work with. And so he wasn't even a member and did not know about the Leadership Alliance, but the program got in contact with him and he said, "Oh yeah, this is great. How do I not know about this? Yes, please bring him out." And through the program itself, the networking opportunities, and of course, GRE prep and things like that, I really think that this was able to get me into grad school and teach me so much about research in general. Is a very shining example of this. My graduate mentor at the University of Maryland, when I asked her why she chose me, why she wanted to work with me, she said, "Well, I looked at your CV and you just had so much research experience. You'd already presented your research multiple times, you've been to conferences, and I was just impressed. I'd never seen that. And I can give a lot of that credit to the Leadership Alliance for putting me in, to the point that when I got to graduate school, I kind of knew a lot of what already to do. I said, "Oh yeah, I already know how to do this. I did this last summer." So I can't speak highly enough. And I tell people all the time, especially undergrads, if they think about getting their PhD program, look up the Leadership Alliance. It's invaluable.
Thank you. And I know you mentioned in your bio that you went to Morehouse College for undergrad. So can you talk a little bit about that transition from an HBCU to a predominantly white institution, and also how you think your HBCU prepared you? What strengths did you bring with you from Morehouse, and how did that influence your decision to pursue graduate school and your experience?
Well, going from an HBCU to a PWI, I was already, my high school was mostly white. And so it was very much a PWI, it was a college prep school. And so going back to that type of environment, I could really feel how Morehouse had changed me and had prepared me. And so at Morehouse and at a lot of HBCUs, one thing that they stress is the student teacher relationship. And that was, again, invaluable and instilled in me so much confidence, especially because, as mentioned, my mentor was already impressed with the depth of my research experience. So having the confidence and knowing that I can walk into a room and speak intelligently and be accepted and be seen as a scholar. I can't stress enough how important the HBCU experience was to that and to building that. So yeah, I really feel as though just being able to be in an environment that is that nurturing and is that accepting, and honestly, just where you are the norm and not the exception and not the minority and not the Black guy, yeah, it's super, super helpful. As well as just how to carry myself. It was very interesting. If you know Morehouse students, you know we all wear suits and have ties and are ready to go and be professional. And when I got to graduate school, the other men in my program, two of them did not own a suit at the time of our first conference. I was like, oh, I've got like three, thanks to Morehouse. And we got to the conference and I just knew what to do. And that was definitely because of the Leadership Alliance and because of Morehouse. So yeah, again, can't thank them enough.
Awesome. We had a lot of student questions about your background in terms of studying diversity in the military. So,
Mhm.
what were some of the most important things that you learned or that you discovered, and how has that influenced your perception of diversity and inclusiveness, specifically in the tech industry?
Ooh, very good question. So I was always interested in diversity. As I mentioned, I came from a very, very white prep school and saw many diversity issues. I probably don't even have to get into it because we all probably know what a lot of those were. And so I was always interested in that. And as an organizational psychologist, I was interested in it in the workforce. School is one thing, but it's different when it's the people who are writing your checks, doing things like microaggressions and issues like that. And one thing I learned a lot, but I'll say that the top most important things I learned about diversity in the military was how many issues arise because of policies. And I'll give an example. I worked with the Coast Guard and we were doing a large project on the experience of women in the Coast Guard, especially on these small ships, which could be a problem because you may be one of three women on a boat of 100 people, which of course gives kind of issues that you would already be able to guess. But also, if you wanted to say speak out on these issues, there's almost no way to do it anonymously if it's like, well, one of the three women were complaining about this. And it led to, or it didn't lead to, but it reflected how some of the issues that they were bringing up and being ignored were not new. The most kind of fun one to speak about was this issue of weight, and weight and body standards, which is pretty standard for military. You have to be a certain level of fitness. And the standards that they used for women were developed in the 1880s. And so they were horrifyingly outdated and really just did not make any sense. And being able to speak to not only things like microaggressions and interpersonal connections, but also speaking to just honestly policy. That makes such a difference. And along with my work at RAND, my work in graduate school, I was interested in ambiguity. And my example for that in not only tech, but really in workplaces else everywhere is if you have situations where things are not clearly defined or things are not spelled out, that leaves a lot of room for discrimination. One key example of this would be looking at, say, if someone is posting a salary on LinkedIn or something like that. If they do not post a salary or if they do not establish what salary expectations are, white men will be paid more than members of other groups. And there's a million reasons why, but one key one is just a lot of people of color and women devalue themselves comparatively to white men. And there's also a case of, well, you need some form of information. The information isn't cleared out. So who do you go to? You go to your network. And many times the networks of white men are more influential, have more power, or more informed than those of different minorities as well as women. And it's the old boys club at work. So I would say clear policies, clearly having goals in mind on how to improve diversity or provide more information is key. And it's part of the reason why effective DI institutions matter and why they make a big difference.
Interesting. And can you talk a little bit about, why you chose organizational psychology and your experience as a behavioral scientist, why you decided to go into that field?
Sure. So I was always a psychology major, and around my sophomore year, Morehouse focused heavily on educational psych. That's what most of the research professors there did. It was a key drive. And I think sophomore year, I realized, yeah, I don't like kids like that. Like, I mean, I love children, but I don't want to study them. I don't want to do this. I'd rather adults are just more interesting. I would rather focus on work, especially because, of course, education is important. It's clear, but most adults spend most of their lives at work. Clearly, this matters. And I just did not see a lot of information or a lot of research out there. I didn't see a lot of Black people in these spaces when I did look for it. And yeah, that was really driving up. Okay, I think organizational psych might be more interesting to me. And to be completely transparent, I talked to one of my mentors in undergrad, and I was asking him about organizational psych. And he said, yeah, I don't know much about it, but I know they make good money. And for that, I was like, oh, okay, say less. I don't need to hear anything else. If they make good money and the work is interesting, I'm all for it. So yeah, which is true, by the way. Organizational psych, we do pretty well financially.
And how did you make the transition from, your career as a behavioral scientist into tech?
So this is probably going to be a long response because I saw many questions on this. So I'm just going to go through the whole story and maybe we can have follow-up questions after that. So first of all, a lot of organizational psych, especially at University of Maryland and honestly schools up and down the East Coast, have a lot of connections and a lot of focus on the government and the military. They pay well. Organizational psych was really strongly developed around World War II. So even historically, it just has a connection to the military. And I'll put it like this. My undergrad program was funded by the Department of Defense. My mentor at University of Maryland had grants from the Department of Defense. And then the RAND Corporation, I worked with the Department of Defense. So for me, it was a very clear pipeline of organizational psych. Well, the military loves you guys because you help with diversity stuff, you help with efficiency. Of course, the military, it's all about organization. So organizational psychologists are key. There are tons of jobs there. Aside from, say, like consulting field and maybe coaching fields, military is the number 3 hiring entity for organizational psychologists. So they are just out there. And I'll say that my interest was more so on diversity than it was on the military. I just knew I wanted to focus on diversity. And I knew that diversity in the military, it matters. And as a grad student, I wanted a job. And so I interned there, and it was just a good place to work. So I stuck with diversity in the military. And the reason I left was not because of like a disinterest or like frustrations with diversity, nothing like that. It was completely up to the company I was working with and government funding at the time. So our research was always funded by by the government. The RAND Corporation is a not-for-profit. They don't do their studies independently. And unless you get outside money from, say, NSF or something like that, then you need your research to be justified by the government to say, okay, this looks like good research, we'll fund it, or we'll come to you when we have research to do. And so I left in 2020 because, bluntly, politics. So lots of the diversity work that I really wanted to do and was passionate about was defunded by the last presidential administration. And that was extremely frustrating, especially because we were making some solid progress. But again, to speak on politics a little bit, this was around the time where the backlash against things like critical race theory was really picking up. And so a lot of the programs and a lot of the things that I was working on, the government was like, okay, no, wrap this up. We don't care about this. Let's just do these other things. And the other work available did not interest me. And so I was already looking. And at the time when I began looking, I hadn't even I had never even heard of user experience research. I didn't know what it was. Yeah, just had no clue. So I had two friends who were working at Facebook at the time, one from undergrad and one from grad school. And I reached out to them, said, yeah, you guys are both organizational psychologists and you're working at Facebook. How does this work? And so for those of you who may not know, an user experience researcher is someone who gets and collects information from users of different services in order to improve different things. So my go-to explanation for this is if, say, you're on Instagram and you just can't do something that you want to do, or something's not working right, and you say to yourself, I wish they would change that. We are the they. We are the people that you would reach out to and say, hey, why don't you guys change this? And we tell them. Now, whether or not they'll listen, that's a whole other thing. But we will at least tell them, like, hey, users are saying this, that, and the third. We need to at least try to change this and experiment to change this. And it also appealed to me because, honestly, I'm a big nerd. I built my own computer. I love playing games. And everyone here is probably, all the students are going to be too young to really know, but my first interaction with computers was Windows 95, which you guys are really lucky you never have to work with something that hideously designed. So as a young child, I've been complaining about the way things work and user interfaces my whole life. And I also have two parents who refuse to learn about technology. They just call me and say, hey, we're trying to learn this. Can you just tell me? So this was, in a way, personal. And I said, okay, yeah, I could do this. And luckily, I've had the opportunity to work with content creators, which, yeah, I probably is not as important as diversity in the military, but their experiences do. And this is the livelihood of many people. And so trying to understand and improve the experiences, and in many cases, improve the amount of money that these content creators get, yeah, was important. And also flat out, again, being honest, the pay was way higher than I was making at the RAND Corporation. And that definitely appealed to me. So the transition was smooth. Um, and I'll also speak to the work because this, I think, is the value for any research career you ever want to get into. One of my mentors, how I met at Morehouse, he was the first organizational psychologist I'd ever met. And he told me, look, you get a PhD, what it really signals is that you can think and that you can learn. And with it, it provides so much flexibility. And I think my transition really reflects that because when you learning research, of course, you're learning about your field, and that's important, but you're also learning how to collect information, how to conduct statistical analyses, how to write well, how to communicate well. No matter what business, all of that is important. So I worked with people at Rand who were, say, studying climate change and how people felt about how climate change and science around it was communicated. And I asked them what their PhD was, and it was in astronomy. They were just focused on climate change and passionate about it because it is an important issue. And their degree, I'm not going to say it didn't matter, it clearly did, but they weren't using it like that. They were using the skills they learned in graduate school and applying it to something that they are interested in. And so, one thing that I want to say for anyone here, because I know that finding your identity matters and is important, you do not have to put that much pressure on it. You can definitely feel free to change it. And that's one of the beauties of having a PhD. You're getting the skills that are so applicable, and people love it. And I don't know if I'll stick with Meta for that much longer. I'm actually looking for other places. But I know that I've got enough talent and enough diversity just in my background that I'll be able to do not whatever I want, but pretty much do research wherever
Yeah, I'm glad you touched on that, because I was actually going to ask, for students out there who are, might be working in a wet lab somewhere and they don't necessarily know what they want to do, but then they see your CV or your bio and they say, wow, he's at Meta. How did he get there? Is there anything else you want to say about like transferable skills? As someone who is a researcher or an aspiring researcher, to kind of where you are today and how you made that leap?
Sure. I would say when it comes to transferable skills, it's the ones I mentioned already, just the different research skills like statistics. If you're good at statistics, you pretty much have a blank check. You can do anything because all companies rely on numbers. So yeah, do that, be good at it. I'm not great at statistics. I never liked statistics. I was disappointed at how much statistics I had to learn in graduate school. The good news is though, statistics outside of graduate school in the applied setting is super easy. It's not hard. It's not the hard, difficult. Yeah, if you know statistics, the most intensive thing I've done at Meta is a t-test. Whereas in graduate school, I had to do advanced structural linear equations, which kicked my butt. And I've never spoken about structural linear equations ever in my career. And most of my colleagues, when I bring it up, they're like, don't talk about that. That's grad school stuff. That being said, if you're really into statistics and that, those opportunities are there. And hey, go for it, because data analysts, like I said, I'm very happy with my salary. Yeah, they make more than me, and fine, they can have it. But if you're into that, that's great. So when it comes to the transferable skills, I would say always keep it in mind. And I'm just a social scientist. For those of you who are in the harder sciences, then just having that laboratory experience, being able to speak to people who are familiar with labs and familiar with research is really helpful. And to be honest, a lot of people don't always expect it from people of color, which I'm sure we can all relate to. If I start speaking about like, yeah, no, I know what it's like to work in a lab. I've had research assistants, I've ran projects, I've been the PI on many different studies. That alone just gets your foot in the door because people say, oh, okay, it's another profession. We know who this is, what this is all about. So yeah, those transferable skills are the research ones. And then the one I haven't spoke about just yet is interpersonal skills, how to work with people, how to collaborate with people. Academia, of course, is very collaborative. You work with a lot of people. You learn how to connect about research and just nerd out over stuff together. That is super important and something that I find has been more helpful than I expected to be in my career. Just to be able to speak to people from a breadth of different backgrounds and be able to communicate your work to them.
And following up on that, what would you say to maybe a student who's an introvert, about the power of networking or the power
Yeah.
of leveraging your network, to advance? Have you learned about that? And what advice would you give to students in terms of whether or not you think that's important?
I would say it's very important. Someone had the question of how do I use my network from the Leadership Alliance? I did not. And please use this as a cautionary tale. Like I still have, I think my career ended up pretty well, and I'm happy with where it is now. But when I was an undergrad at the Leadership Alliance, I was just overwhelmed. You can probably tell from how much I'm talking that I'm not an introvert, but I still did not connect like I should have. LinkedIn was not what it is now. So the connections were not as easy and not as fluid. And I regret it so much. So first of all, when it comes to the importance, please connect. Please at least send emails to people. I better be getting a lot of emails from you all after this. Definitely want to make sure because there's so much talent and so many people with so many diverse experiences. And as I mentioned before, with the transferable skills, you have no idea how someone in a background completely different from you will have something that is somehow relevant because they have some connection or they do something that you are also interested in. You just don't know. And that was something that in undergrad I did not know. I used to think like, oh, what do I need to talk to a chemistry professor for? Psychology. They don't even respect soft sciences like that. And you never know, that chemistry professor might know someone at some company you want to work with. So definitely connect. As far as the introvert thing, because I am not an introvert, however, I have introvert friends and I have been speaking to them about connecting. Some of them flat out cheat, and I respect this completely. Now that AI and like chat GPT is a thing, they just say like, hey, AI, write a prompt for me or like write a message because I don't know what to say and I don't know what to do. And you can just send a message on LinkedIn or email and just do it that way. It doesn't matter if it's like cold or robotic. No one really cares. It's fine. Just say that, okay, yeah, hey, if this student is interested, I'll help them out. And that seems to be working very well for them. Other than that, if you're in, say, in-person situations or you want to connect and you know that like speaking or just talking in big groups isn't your thing, that's completely fine because those one-on-one messages are almost just, or really can be just as important as just the big communications. We're also PhDs. There's plenty of nerds. Most of my colleagues are introverts. They'll understand. So if you're feeling pressured and feeling like, oh, I don't want to really express, I don't want to be that awkward person. We're all awkward. We're all a bunch of dorks. So it's fine. We're all very understanding. So don't even worry about it. And yeah, you guys will be fine. Send messages if that's better for you than speaking.
Great advice. And I hope all the students out there follow us on all of our social media channels. We're on Instagram, we're on LinkedIn, we're on Facebook. We also have our own social networking platform called TLA Connect. So hopefully you'll all connect with us on one of those channels. So this is one of the questions that came into the Q&A. It's kind of a heavy question, but I think it's important. So I'm going to read the question from the Q&A. This is from a student. I'm currently researching how the 2020 Black Lives Matter movement has affected African-American youth and young adults due to mainstream social media. Knowing that you became a behavioral scientist at the RAND Corporation and studied how content creators could best use social platforms, what is your opinion on the effect of social media on Black youth witnessing the Black Lives Matter movement, and how could it possibly affect them in the future? So I don't know if you have an answer for that, but I'll allow you to take that on.
Well, my answer might not be as well informed as someone who's writing an in-depth paper on it, but that is, first of all, it's a really cool topic, and yeah, that's really awesome. But as far as social media, because this will be speaking more to content creation in general, I think that it provides a lot of challenges, both in terms of how to how it affects the political and social landscape, as well as how it affects the aspirations of young Black or youth. So I'll speak a little bit on the social and political impacts. So first of all, I think the biggest thing social media ever is doing in terms of politics is it provides ways for communities that do not pop up organically to form. And that content creators are very influential and very pivotal to that. So when it comes to especially Black social issues, that comes down to content creators being able to provide and nurture these communities that often bring up discussions or issues that have been ignored by mainstream media or people just aren't talking about them. But that's a big responsibility. And a lot of content creators, they are young or they're inexperienced, or in some cases, they're bad actors. They're not doing what they need to be doing. And many content creators are just nurturing toxic environments. And that's something that my work bumps into all the time, especially because a lot of content creators are concerned about that. They're like, I don't want a toxic fan base, but it feels like there's not much you can do to avoid that. So knowing these issues, yeah, definitely something that you want to that we want to examine more and learn. But I'll say the biggest thing here, there's not enough research on it. I'm so glad to hear about this topic because it's one of those things that are really understudied. And even at Meta, I would love to do more of this work, but it is a business. They're interested in making money. And one thing that I can say that has disappointed me so far is I thought we'd be doing more research on, say, the effects of social media, like this question, and we just don't do enough of that. If you're able to say, hey, this is affecting the company financially, then you can do some research, and I've been lucky enough to do that. Um, so yeah, that speaks to the social political side. In terms of aspirational, this isn't unique to Black youth at all, but it's something that, of course, still affects us. And that is more and more people every day want to be content creators. And that is leading to a very interesting situation where content creators, they're out there, but it's a crowded market. And becoming a content creator that makes money is very much luck of the draw in a lot of cases. And it should never, I can pretty safely say, it should never be your go-to plan. Like either I'm a content creator or nothing. Always have a backup, always know what you want to do, but also go into it with a clear, solid, here's what I want to do. Here's what I want this work, or here's what I want this profile, online presence, what have to do. So these social media influencers, they spend a lot of their time doing work that is not on camera and it's not on social media. It's a tough, tough job. I've got so much respect for them and have learned so at my time at Meta. So just knowing that so many more people want to become social or just content creators, I would really approach it from a place of caution. And that I don't think we'll see the full extent of that for a while. So I'd honestly love to answer this question again in 3 years and see how it goes.
A lot of students want to know, what research you did as an undergraduate and then how you decided that you wanted to pursue a PhD in psychology.
So sure. So my work in undergrad was split between my research at Morehouse and my research at Ohio State and at the Leadership Alliance I studied at Stanford. And at Morehouse, I worked with an advisor, I worked with a mentor. I just asked to be in one of my professor's labs. He let me in, and his work, Dr. Bryant Marks, I don't know if you have any Morehouse students online, but if so, tell him I said hi if you speak. But Dr. Marks, he did research at the time, and I'm pretty sure he still does, on the experiences of Black men in higher education, specifically comparing the experience of Black men at HBCUs with those at PWIs. Um, and yeah, it was very much diversity type work that I basically just took and applied to organizational psych and then to my career ever since. And yeah, at Morales, that was pretty much the only research I did. And his work was part of a long multi-year research that honestly ended after I left. It just took a long time. And at my summer program, I did two studies through organizational psych programs. At Ohio State, my research was on, at Ohio State and at Sanford, I was given a data set from different sources. At Ohio State, it was just from some bank that shall not be named. And it was like, hey, they did a long survey, HR put it together, see what you can do with this survey. And a lot of the questions were about diversity. And so my research was on examining the experiences of people in organizations who had diverse personal friend groups compared to their internal coworkers. So an example of this would be if, say, all of your friends are Black, but then you go into your job and none of your coworkers are Black. How does that affect how you show up in the workplace? And to be completely blunt, I didn't get a lot of interesting things. And now that like I have my PhD and like I can go back and say like, oh wow, that was a bad study. Don't even worry about that. My mentor used to say, your dissertation might be the worst thing you ever write, but that's fine because it only gets better from there. It was my first research study. It happens. So if you're ever worried about anything you do at the Leadership Alliance, remember you are in undergrad. You're just starting. Like you literally don't know what you're doing. You're here to learn what you're doing. Take chances, make mistakes, and get messy, as Miss Frizzle used to say on Magic School Bus. That's how science works. Like it's all about making mistakes. And then the Stanford program, this was 2010, and Obama got elected recently. You guys are really lucky that I'm visiting my family right now. And for some reason, my parents kept my 2010 Leadership Alliance Symposium, and a copy of my research was in it. Looking back, it feels very poorly written compared to me now. So I studied how people were feeling about race, class, ethnicity, and politics in the wake of the 2008 presidential election. This is a time where a lot of people were feeling like, hey, Obama won, we've got a Black president, racism is over, good job, America, that's it. So my research, again, looking at a large data set collected from voters around the country, was, all about that and examining how people felt. Also want to take a pause to mention that that was an organizational psych study. Organization didn't even come up in the text. It was just research that my research advisor wanted to do, which again speaks to the flexibility of having a PhD. Because I asked him, why are you doing this? It's not organizational psych. And he was like, I wanted to do it and I could do it. So I got a grant and did it. That's what you can do with a PhD. So yeah.
That's pretty cool. We have a couple of people on who are taking non-traditional paths into research. And so one of the questions that came through was, what advice do you have for people who want to work in the tech industry, but also have a passion for research? What is the best way for a person to get involved conducting research while working or having a limited research background?
So I'll speak to tech first. So when it comes to, it depends on what type of research that you do. If you are a social scientist or humanities, then what I do, user experience research, would be your best bet because the skills you learn in the social sciences and humanities just apply perfectly to user experience. One of my colleagues has her PhD in Russian literature, but that helps her in the research space because she's really good at reading and analyzing text. which in many cases come from reviews from users. So when it comes to tech, yeah, user experience, that's the field you probably want to lean towards. If you are, say, on the harder sciences, I'm not sure if you're in like the biosciences, but if you're in like engineering or anything like that, then you want to look into different different companies have different research that applies, and you might want to look more at specific companies. An example would be, I know, say, if you are interested in engineering, Spotify right now, or no, SiriusXM right now is hiring research scientists who just know about sound engineering. And I don't know what they do because I don't know anything about sound engineering, but I do know that they're looking for people with PhDs in engineering fields or physics or yeah, I think that might be it. I can't remember the third one. So I would say look for the field you're in if you're in the harder sciences, but social sciences, market research or user experience research, yeah, you could get into tech. Um, as far as non-traditional, so one of my colleagues at the University of Maryland, before he joined, he was a plumber. And so I've asked him millions of times, like, how in the world did you pull this off? And the key is being in contact with people who are doing research and doing what you can to help support them. So when I was at Maryland, one of my friends, I let her work in my lab in the evenings, just helping run studies. And I can't remember what she was doing at the time. She was just working and just working in the evenings, coming in, which was super valuable because none of my undergrad research assistants wanted to work in the evenings, but she did and was there collecting data, helping run studies, which was such a benefit. So I would say reach out to anyone you can. This might take a bit of networking, but you're in the right place for leadership alliance. And see if you can connect with a professor or a grad student who is currently doing the type of research you want to do and see if you have help. Now, I'll be honest, you'll most likely have to volunteer, and that sucks, but see what you can. And for my friend who worked in my lab, for me, she got a referral both from me and my graduate advisor. She got research experience, and she was then able to join a PhD program herself. So yeah, the way to do research is just to reach out to people. And depending on the field, we need the help. And I'll say psychology is absolutely one of them. We almost always need someone else to help with studies. And it works out really well for grad students to say, oh, hey, I met this grown adult who's responsible, who can help us run studies, and they'll do it for free, and it won't take any grant money or anything like that. Yeah, professors love that type of stuff.
Yeah, and I will also co-sign the fact that you can take a non-traditional path. So I have a friend, she actually went to Spelman. She has a PhD and in STEM background. And she was the global DEI head at Spotify. She's now made like a whole career now out of DEI work, and she's a motivational speaker, and she's basically, tours different organizations and conferences, and she is the DEI expert. So she went from, a background in STEM as an undergraduate student to now working at major corporations and being asked by other corporations to speak on DEI. So what you think you want to do, now as an undergraduate student may not necessarily be where you end up. And also she's a friend, so I can call on her if I need someone to speak, or, I need a subject matter expert in global issues. So that goes back to the power of your network. So definitely keep, building those relationships and leveraging your network. Dr. Crosby, we also had a number of questions again, and I know you kind of spoke to this at the beginning, but about your transition from an HBCU to a PWI. Were there any specific challenges that you had to overcome with respect to the transition that you want to speak to?
Yeah, getting used to microaggressions again was tough. So at Maryland, there were several times when, say, I turn the corner and like a white woman would be walking and she'd grab her purse. It's like, oh yeah, this does happen. Right, right. I'm no longer at Morehouse. Like this is the thing. And that sucked. I was not really in the mood to deal with that while also being a grad student. Also, like how intimidating could I look carrying a stats book and like wearing a sweater and just looking like a grad student? So it was just frustrating in that sense. And one thing that was super helpful was just keeping in contact with fellow HBCU grads. Luckily, I was at University of Maryland. It's right outside DC. DC is like full of HBCU grads. If you guys know, especially Howard people are there, it just attracts a lot. And so that super valuable. Stay in contact, do what you can to keep connected. It really helped keep me sane and was also just nice to connect with other people who many were doing the same thing. So keep your college friends definitely. See if you can get help that way. Another thing was going from just a school that was Morehouse size, and like I mentioned, the student teacher connection being so important. And I got to Maryland and working with undergrads, they didn't even know some of our most famous professors in the program because we had famous professors who got their tenure in like the 80s and stopped teaching effectively and still would get grants, still would do research, but never interacted with students. And that took a while to adjust to just the way, the distance there. As a grad student, it was a little better, but I could still feel it. And at first I was like, is it because I'm black? Or, oh no, you guys just can't communicate, period. So that was tough to adjust to. And for that, I would suggest you just have to put a little bit more effort in. I was used to, oh, I could just talk to this teacher after class. It wouldn't be a big problem. But I got really in the habit of just walking into professors' rooms and just speaking with them. Grad school can be professor might look at you more like a colleague than a student, especially if it's a professor you don't work with a lot. And so kind of treating them as coworkers instead was kind of helpful and getting to know them a little bit personally. My advisor, I love her to death. She's a big partier and that legitimately helped. Like she's the type of person you get to a party and she's like, oh, hey, you're here. Have some wine or some beer. And it's just like, I don't know if I want to drink around you. This is weird. So like getting to know them and being able to like work with their personalities was super important. And luckily in grad programs, unless you're in a huge program, you get to know the professors way more than you normally would. And it's kind of weird. So getting to work with them, understand you're a grad student, you may have to put more effort to get to know them, but once you do, you'll have more access to them than any undergrad student, and everyone's rooting for you. And if you find a professor that's not rooting for you, stay away from that professor. That's weird. That is their problem. They shouldn't be like that, but it's just the reality. So when have people that you can rely on or people that you're interested in, you just have to put more effort in putting yourself out there. And that was not my experience at an HBCU where professors were beating down doors to connect and doing what they can to help you. You just have to be a lot more forward in getting that help. Another thing, and this was nice, the flip side of that is if I met any Black professor, they were pumped and they were always by my side. I was like, oh, wait a minute, you're an organizational psychologist? Great. There's like 3 of us. Please join us. We'll help you out. This might depend on your field, but if you're in one where there's not a lot of people that look like you, the people that do look like you, they'll start treating you like their niece or nephew. They want to help. They want to do it because we need more of us. We need that representation. Please come and help. That was something that was nice.
That's great advice. And we're almost out of time, Dr. Crosby, but I do want to ask if there's any parting information or words of wisdom you want to share with our student community here that's joined us? Anything you want to say about, again, the Leadership Alliance, or just how to navigate research in general?
One thing that I'll say is keep in contact with the people that you're doing the program with. I still have very good friends from people that I did the Stanford program in 2010. I cannot believe it's been 13 years, but keep that in mind because they are going to be, in my case at least, they were the people who understood what grad school was all about more than anyone. And they are super supportive. They might not be like your number one go-to support system, but just having that so important. Please stay in contact because they know, and they'll be right there with you going through the same thing. If some of them are, say, a year or so ahead of you, they can give you a good heads up on what things might be, how to help. Just know that you'll never have to do grad school alone when you're in this program because you'll always have others. And do not take that for granted. I've met many people in grad school who are like, oh, I don't know any other people of color who are in my field, or I don't know anyone else who's doing this work. And the people that I knew, the reason why I did know, yeah, my HBCU, yes, but as I said, my HBCU didn't have organizational psych. The only organizational psychologists I met who were people of color who were starting grad school when I were through the Leadership Alliance and the other program that I did. Use this, like understand the Leadership Alliance collects and brings people together that are normally spread out. It is hard to find other, say, Black people in my field. The Alliance helped out tremendously with that. So use that connection and also keep in contact with the professors that you work with at the Leadership Alliance. They, of course, have the connections and they're already participating in the Leadership Alliance. So they've already self-selected to be supportive people that want to be there. Again, this is so important for networking. The more you know someone, the better they are as a networking partner. Having someone that you just talk to on LinkedIn is great and all, and they may help you. But if you know someone that knows you and really knows what you're able to do, they can speak way more intelligently and be able to help you out. So again, having those connections really matter. And the last thing I'll say is really get good at being able to write a lot. This is something that, I don't know, some math PhDs can like sidestep this, but for the rest of us, you got to write a lot. And so getting used to doing that and like not the quality, literally quantity. So write a little bit every day, write a journal, like that'll just get you in the habit of writing. Even if like it's just 5 minutes a day and just building from there. Yeah, you're going to have to write a lot. There's no way around it, really. So just get good at it. That is probably the skill that has been the most helpful. Just being able to just be able to write and explain your research, especially to those who have no idea what your research is. I've met many people who are like, "You're an organizational psychologist? What is that?" Just like, well, I could explain it later, but here's a report I wrote for you. And I have to make sure that the report I wrote for them, they'll understand it, even though they've never even heard of my field. You have to be able to do the same thing. So get good at that. Explain your research to people who don't know what you're talking about. And that will help tremendously.
Thank you. Yeah, I will co-sign the writing piece. I tried to sidestep it, but now I find myself writing grants, and which I said I would never do. So I'm doing that. And also, for those students who are on the VPD that are not part of Leadership Alliance, because we do have some students that are not formally part of the summer program, I would say definitely leverage the Google Classroom, make connections, follow up with the panelists and the wonderful doctoral scholars that have agreed to talk with us. Make sure you're leveraging those connections and making those points of contact. So I would just add that. And again, find us on social media. We put a lot of content out there. We have a YouTube channel, so all of these sessions are recorded on our YouTube channel. So if you miss something, they're all there for you. But we're here for you. So even if you're not formally a part of the program, there are lots of resources that you can access to tap into our network. So thank you so much, Dr. Crosby, for your time. Dr. Crosby will be sharing his contact information. We will post it in the Google Classroom for those questions that we did not get to. There were a number of them. Or you want to just follow up offline. If you have another question for Dr. Crosby that we didn't get to, you can certainly reach out to him directly.
Absolutely. And feel free to email me, find me and message me on LinkedIn. Yeah.
All right. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you on Wednesday.